Hey everyone, a quick note before we dive in here. This is an interview I recorded back in February of this year as part of a documentary I'm putting out on the NFT and crypto art scene in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has amazing things happening when it comes to NFTs, crypto, and I really wanted to capture it. So that documentary will be coming out the end of this month in all likelihood, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But in the meantime, I wanted to release some of the full-length interviews I did with folks during my time there. So this is a conversation I had with Amanda Cassatt, who's so incredible. Some of you may know who she is. She was the CMO for ConsenSys, as in MetaMask ConsenSys, from 2016 to 2019. She was really essentially the CMO for Ethereum during that time. Amanda is now the founder and CEO of Serotonin, which is a leading Web3 marketing agency. That spun off Mojito, which is a Web3 platform for commerce, community, brand engagement, and building engagement. So she's really a gigabrain in the space. I'm so glad I got to speak with her. And I think you are going to really enjoy this conversation. Before we get into it, we do need to hear a word from our sponsor, who I'm happy to say is MetaMask. So thank you so much for MetaMask for sponsoring this content. They sponsored the documentary. They've been an awesome partner. And I really hope you enjoy. MetaMask is the leading Web3 wallet to get you access to everything you need in Web3. If you're just getting started on your NFT journey, you need MetaMask. And if you need to fund your MetaMask account in order to buy that NFT that you've been eyeing, well, now you can do that directly through MetaMask. Just click the blue buy button on the home screen. Personally, I'm mad that I've spent extra gas fees transferring money from Coinbase to MetaMask in order to buy NFTs. I've been using MetaMask directly, and it is so much better. You can also buy stable coins and native tokens from Ethereum, Polygon, Avalanche, CeeLo, and others. And you can do it directly with your debit card, your credit card, through Apple Pay or Google Pay. And there is now an improved buying experience on MetaMask Mobile. You'll only see tokens that are in your region, so it's personalized to you, and you'll get real-time quotes, so you know you're always getting the best deal. If you haven't downloaded MetaMask yet, what are you waiting for? Go try it out. You can learn more about buying cryptocurrencies with MetaMask at metamask.io/buy-crypto.
Amanda, I'm so pumped we're here. You are the one who introduced me to the concept of the Canon Club. Somebody else had mentioned the Gallery Inn, but you were like, Carly, we're going to the Canon Club. We're getting drinks, and it's going to be fantastic. And here we are in like the most gorgeous setting I can imagine.
In Old San Juan, the Canon Club is where it's at.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm so excited to dive into so much with you. You were like the marketer for Ethereum, essentially, for like Ethereum itself for like several years. What was your journey into Web3 and sort of like where we are now? I know that's a ton of space, but tell people like where you were, why I call you the marketer of Ethereum, and like your deal.
Yeah, sure. So I first learned about Ethereum in 2015.
Was it out in 2015?
It was just out. Vitalik's white paper when he created Ethereum was 2013.
So earlier than I realized.
And then they raised $16 million in the Ethereum pre-sale. So there was $16 million of capital looking to buy 30-cent Ethereum at the time. And so we have to kind of paradigm shift into the mindset of what it's like when you're creating something new and people don't know what it is yet and people don't care yet. And now looking back, it's easy to see it as inevitable or see it as obvious, but let that $16 million of capital tell you how non-obvious it was. I was able to raise more than that for our startup, probably with less trouble than the original Ethereum founders were able to raise that 16 million. So just saying.
Yeah, to give that context. And was there was Bitcoin, of course, and then was like there Litecoin? Like were other coins out there?
Yeah. So there's Bitcoin.
Yeah, of course.
And I never really learned about Bitcoin early on. I just wasn't part of those hacker newsletters, message boards, whatever. I wish I learned.
You weren't on that Reddit thread.
I wasn't on that Reddit thread. I wish I'd learned about it, obviously, at the time, but I didn't. And so my path to it was a little bit different. I was in media. I worked at the Huffington Post. Then I had my own media startup that was, without calling it this, a decentralized micropayment-based media startup. What we did was, it was called Slant. We micro-paid journalists and journalism school students and college students for content based on the ad revenue served across it, and we'd give them 70% of the revenue. And a lot of times we were splitting the dollar, splitting the cent. And so even though the business model worked out logically, it kind of didn't work out practically because of those third-party payment processors.
Because you couldn't actually fractionalize a dollar or
Well,
a
you
cent.
can, but you're just
easily.
paying a big spread to that third-party payment
Got
processor. And so I learned a lot about payments through that process and got obsessed with payments. And so when I was kind of a knucklehead knocking around Brooklyn.
Hard to imagine you as a knucklehead, but
fair.
understood.
Thank you. I was going to meetups. I was talking to people. I had this kind of payments obsession. And so I bumped into Joe Lubin, Andrew Keys, Sam Cassatt. You'll notice that my name is now Cassat. That's a whole nother story.
One more sparkling margarita, we'll get there.
Even half. I'm a lightweight these days. But yeah, so I met some of the early Ethereum folks from just kind of hanging out. And it blew my mind when they explained to me what the technology could do. Not only did it solve my startup's problem with the micropayments, but it unlocked all these different business models, fractionalization, micropayments, remittances, in all of these different categories. And every time I thought about a new sector, a new industry, and all the business types that are possible enabled by peer-to-peer transactions, enabled by smart contracts, enabled by permissionlessness, it just kind of blew my mind. And I realized that I needed to join the circus. So I did. And
this is now 2015, 2016?
This is 2015, 2016. 2016, I'm officially Chief Marketing Officer at ConsenSys. And ConsenSys and the Ethereum Foundation had split the Ethereum Foundation to continue building the code base of Ethereum, and Vitalik leading that as its chief scientist, and there's also an executive director. And then ConsenSys still doing a lot of the work with the code, maintaining several versions, created the ERC20 token standard, fun fact, but also starting to build some of the not only commercial applications, but the tools and rails that would enable commercial
Famously,
applications.
MetaMask is a ConsenSys product.
MetaMask, yeah, but also Infura, Truffle, Gitcoin, Kaleido, and also a lot of things that didn't work, right? Like 99% of startups fail. I think ConsenSys had an unusually high success rate compared to just your average, even investor or venture studio, and obviously recently this extraordinary success with MetaMask. But during my time as CMO at ConsenSys from 2016 through 2019, one of the things I was most proud of was building out each of our startups, not just as this is a startup doing X, but as a case study for what you could do with Ethereum. So whether or not that project worked, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, it was showcasing to others what Ethereum could do, and there would end up being all kinds of projects inspired by those projects, even ones that didn't work out. For example, Ujo, Jesse Grushak working on NFTs for music in, I don't know what it was, he started so early, 2016, maybe even 2015. And now you have really great projects in that space like Royal, like Audius, that are inspired by that are maybe even using some of the information from it, that are advised by some of the same people. And so a lot of things were too early, but a lot of things worked. And some of them ended up just being kind of the ancestor of some of the leading projects right now. So I built out what ended up being an 80-person department by the end of my time there that included content, building a big content engine about Ethereum, media, telling the story about Ethereum, Web3, we were using that term very early, NFTs, DAOs. DeFi really wasn't as popular at the beginning, but it became popular as a term. The ICO boom, we tried to call ICOs TGEs, token generation events, because we all know what ICO rhymes with, and we knew that might bother certain people. So content, PR, product marketing, growth marketing, design, both like brand design and product design.
You built out this whole team at ConsenSys that then would get deployed to these companies that you were essentially incubating, your MetaMask, your Infura, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
is that really how, and is that still how ConsenSys operates?
Yeah, so I was there between 2016 and 2019 through kind of Ethereum's early crucial growth period. And I saw my role as really being kind of Ethereum's storytelling booster rocket to the degree that I could serve in that capacity from my position. And so that's really what I was doing. And so yes, that department, which we called Catalyst, we rebranded the word marketing. And because marketing gets a bad name.
Yeah. But also reminds me of like Dee's being chief vibes officer. You know, like I think this space in general likes to.
I don't know about that, but
you're like, don't compare me to that.
I don't know, but we called it something else. And so we were working on the core ConsenSys brand. We were putting out messaging about Ethereum into the world, and we were working in kind of a service capacity with all of the different what we would call portfolio companies of ConsenSys, but inside of ConsenSys, we'd call that the ConsenSys mesh. And whether it works that way or not these days is another story. I can tell you about everything in ConsenSys through 2019, and then my authority fades.
And we're gonna get into what you have done since 2019, but I want to ask you because, and probably to some extent your role still is in the work you do now, but like your role was telling the story of Ethereum. What do you think are like the biggest misperceptions that you see out in the world and the mainstream about Ethereum, about crypto, about this space?
Yeah. So when I started in my role, I was actually already trying to correct a big misperception.
Okay.
And that misperception was that there was something dark about Bitcoin, because most people found out about Bitcoin from the Silk Road. And so they thought it's for buying drugs. It's for, illegal transactions, because that's how they'd been introduced to the technology. So we were very intentional trying to brand Ethereum as something light and bright. And luckily, the personality of its founders and its early community really tallied with that.
I'm like literally picturing Vitalik memes right now.
I know.
Pajamas, like public places.
Yeah. So light and bright in that regard, but also in terms of enterprise adoption. And so you get in 2017, February 28th, 2017, I have that date
emblazoned in your brain.
In my memory, was the day of the launch of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which really was the which lit the fire of Ethereum price action. And basically, in a single day, we announced that we'd created this industry group of a number of leading organizations. Microsoft was there, JP Morgan, Santander, Accenture, Intel, a number of banks, a number of software companies, a number of startups, and ConsenSys. And they were pledging to help create a set of standards for the enterprise adoption of Ethereum, and announcing that they had working groups experimenting with Ethereum. And so when I say light and bright, I don't just mean cats and rainbows, although I kind of mean cats and rainbows. Yeah. I also mean being really clear that this can be used by banks, can be used by enterprise.
Legitimate, upfront, upstanding institutions. It's safe. The water's warm. Come on in.
Yeah, and that there's that potential for them. And I think people forget now that it was really the endorsements of those large enterprises that gave the market the confidence in Ethereum to start investing in it heavily on a retail level and on an institutional level. Because before that, when you Googled Ethereum, you got Vitalik, which is great for certain demographics. That's going to be appealing to certain demographics. It's appealing to me. Yeah. I mean, he's incredible.
Yeah.
But now, after the launch of the EEA, when you Googled Ethereum, you got Santander's president, Julio Fora. And that's going to appeal to a different group of people. And so that really changed the world. And then there are people that will say, oh, I don't care about traditional and old school enterprises adopting this technology. And that may be, and that's a valid perspective. But the news cycles that came out of the price action, that came out of that adoption, brought tons of developers into the space, and just brought tons of awareness, which brought venture capital investment, which brought demand pull on developers and other kinds of staff members. And so it started to spin a flywheel of growth. And so that part of the story is actually extremely important.
Why do you think, or what do you think, I guess, of the criticisms that you get now from like Jack Dorsey's of the world, right? Saying like, this whole decentralization thing is kind of bullshit because really the new master is just the VCs, right? Like,
not true.
Okay.
Oh, so
do you know that argument though that folks make out there? Okay.
I do. So I want to arrive there, but I want to go through your previous question first about the misconception. So when I started working on Ethereum, I immediately was trying to correct the misconception that crypto from Bitcoin, that crypto in general is for dark
for human
arts,
trafficking,
dark arts, because there are obviously a lot of other use cases. So that was one of the first. I want to address that misconception that it's just the same people. But I want to, the one that I've seen circulating the most recently is actually the environmental one, which, I think it's interesting. And the thing is so nuanced that it deserves actual explanation. And I was recently in a Vogue article about sustainability and NFTs. And I spent a lot of time with her to actually lay this out. Because it's so easy to say, this is bad for the environment. Well, what does that mean, right? What does bad mean? So one of the core misconceptions, I think, has to do with the fact that mining and minting are just one T apart. And so some folks think that when you mint an NFT, that you're doing the activity,
the computation of
mining. And so what I've tried to spread awareness about is that essentially, whether you mint 1 or 1 billion NFTs, you're not changing the marginal energy usage of the Ethereum blockchain. You are using the Ethereum blockchain because that's offering you that base settlement layer that's going to enable your NFT to have value because it's going to run on an actual decentralized blockchain. And so you're pulling on NFT existence as a concept is still pulling on this system called Ethereum that requires energy to function in its current proof of work mechanism. So you need the Ethereum blockchain underserving this NFT process, but as we talked about, minting 1 versus 1 billion NFTs doesn't change the marginal energy usage of the underlying Ethereum blockchain. That being said, the underlying Ethereum blockchain that it pulls on is energy intensive in that to the degree that it uses a proof of work mining algorithm, but 90+% of the energy that goes into ETH mining, into the Ethereum network, is from mining. It's not from transactions, it's not from NFT minting, and so there's a huge misconception about that. And then on the actual energy front, 2 things: the transition from proof of work to proof of stake, according to the Ethereum Foundation, reduces the carbon footprint of the Ethereum blockchain by something like 95%. Wow. And then in addition to that, there's a larger kind of conceptual question, which I think is interesting to all environmentalists, which is the problem energy use or is the problem fuel mix? So if we're using nuclear, if we're using water, if we're using, and there are some issues with the intermittencies in solar and in wind, but if we're using those power types and even doing a more energy intensive proof of work kind of mining and using that energy, but the energy comes from those sources that aren't adding to CO2 levels, then is it a bad thing? And I think just for environmentalists, separating out energy mix from simple energy consumption is a really interesting leap to make that I think sends us in the right direction of investing in less pollutant sources of energy rather than telling humanity that your value creating activities of various sorts aren't good to do because they use energy.
In theory, this should be an incentivization to get to...
And there is, right? So proof of work style mining, usually Bitcoin mining actually, provides an enormous incentive, and you can see this happening everywhere you see vertically integrated Bitcoin mining operations, are incentives for miners to chase renewable sources of energy, which are typically cheaper. Yeah. And so then the other kind of misframing is it's never put in context. When you hear about environment and blockchains, it's never put in context of the energy use of the traditional
banking
financial
industry
system. and all of the ancillary systems like global militaries that exist in order to protect that kind of global financial system. Like every atomic bomb that's ever been exploded is that base layer infrastructure in a way that's subserving the continuation of that global financial system. Every single flight that's ever taken. So there's a context and framing problem, and then there's a problem around just understanding the issues themselves, how the technology works. To someone that doesn't understand anything about computer science, it's a real bamboozler how you could create one of something versus 1 billion of something with the same amount of energy. That's not instinctively clear. And so I think a lot of very well-intentioned people that wish well on people, that wish well on planet, that hope that we can live on this earth happily for many years. I think the worst part is to see them adopt this kind of mind virus, that this binary thinking, crypto bad, when really there are things to fix here, there are things to correct here. I think proof of stake is an interesting transition there, and I think energy mix is a really interesting goal for humanity going toward renewables.
Well, and there's a couple things on that. I think there's also, it becomes the scapegoat issue for people who are already inclined to dislike crypto because they see it as bro. They have impressions about what crypto is anyway that they don't like, and then they get to thrust on it this environmental argument, which
I really see the best in see the best in a lot of people. I share a lot of views with people that identify as environmentalists, and I can't address not real concerns, but the real concern, I can get very specific about what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah, and there's been a kind of persistent problem in media around the environmental concerns, which is that they rely on, and you'll know this better than I do, but like 1 or 2 sort of early studies that were sort of done, and there hasn't been like a kind of new look at the issue.
I think a lot of the negative perceptions about crypto in general are operations orchestrated by incumbents to protect their interests. And so which interests are really harmed by crypto? Well, the big banks, the big banks, and
notorious big friends to the environment.
Well, yeah, so the big banks, and there's a way in which I think federal governments benefit enormously from blockchain and crypto, but I think those that have concerns over, the control of the dollar and other fiat currencies, those folks can have some concerns about crypto. And so a lot of these narratives are really incumbent protection narratives that are created by incumbents, when actually I tend to find environmentalists, like a challenger, like an underdog, are not sure that the system as orchestrated today is how it should be. And in all of those ways, they share values with the people that, or many of the people that are excited about crypto.
Yeah. Okay, let's touch briefly on, if you want to say something on that third sort of dominated by the VCs
of course.
Argument, and then let's get into serotonin. And
I actually have something really interesting to say there, which is that if you're a traditional style VC, you are not getting the upside in crypto that you would if you knew how to do DeFi as a software engineer. And so what yield farming and what DeFi and a lot of the on-chain liquidity provision exercises really are is a market challenge to the prices that VCs can command in the cap tables of lucrative startups.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna have to break that down.
I will, which is basically they're saying that they can attract investors that basically behave like contributors to the software.
Who's they in this scenario?
People creating DeFi protocols.
Okay.
And that tends to privilege developers over a mainstream VC that doesn't have a software team that can actually participate in these protocols. And so the highest yields go to people that understand something about software and can participate in the protocols and provision liquidity in these protocols early. A lot of VCs are still getting their sea legs under them, being able to invest in liquid tokens, being able to custody tokens. And so to say that the VCs are the big winners here, a lot of them have one big, but a lot of the kind of novel innovation in the space is actually right-sizing the value add of a VC and challenging it and saying the value add of coders and software developers is actually maybe greater. And so it's a challenge that's happening in the market. And that's what this represents metaphorically. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally do.
And so a lot of investors have won big. A lot of builders have won big. But I think that evaluating a system at this early stage by who's benefited from it isn't necessarily the right lens, because I think the permissionlessness of Web3 tech means that anyone could be able to create for themselves on this platform without even having a bank account. And yes, there's a lot of barriers to entry. The barriers to entry are that technical knowledge, meeting someone else that knows about this, speaking the correct language in order to be able to learn about this. So yes, of course, not at all saying that Web3 erases the barriers to entry that exist, but it democratizes and lowers that barrier to entry to create something of real value without any material resources, without access to, let's say, Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley to ask for funding.
Absolutely. There are new barriers erected, but it's not the same gatekeeper system that it was.
Exactly.
Like, you can watch a YouTube video, like you can actually sort of self-educate it in a way that isn't about just who you know.
Well, let's look at what the barriers are in the traditional system versus the barriers in this system, right? So in the traditional system, new money is created. It's lent out at a certain interest rate. Certain privileged individuals can, in a room, subjectively decide what those interest rates are. And who gets lent the money first. Bitcoiners all are very familiar with this and think about this a lot, and so be. And in the world of crypto, there's not that same barrier. Decisions aren't made subjectively. The barrier is actually understanding the transparency.
Right. What is your greatest hope for, call it like, I don't know, whatever, everyday people who aren't developers, who maybe aren't like technically savvy, who of course have tremendous amount of advantage and opportunity in this space. Call it in 5 or 10 years, because the barriers are high right now in terms of the UI, UX, but that'll get better. Like, what do you see as you're like, this is why everybody will benefit from this technology in 5 or 10 years?
Oh yeah, of course. So a couple of different layers to that. So first, one does not need to be a developer in order to work in Web3. And Serotonin is a great proof of that, and we can go into that in depth. Then I think that the future of work could be gamified through things like play-to-earn games. And I think we could see, similar to Axie Infinity and its impact in places like the Philippines, I think we could see rising average incomes among even developing nations because they're exposed to these global units of value that aren't discounted based on where they live. And so that's really interesting. We've seen rising inequality economically within countries, but I think we're gonna see rising economic equality between countries. And I think that play to earn gaming and blockchain crypto could be an interesting driver of that, whatever you think of that. So it could help a lot of people, especially in the developing world in that regard. Also, a gamified meaning-making system. So people playing play-to-earn games could just be the future of work in developed economies as well, especially in a future where, you worked with Andrew Yang, in a future where there's more automation. It offers a set and setting where value can actually meaningfully be created, even though it's in a new kind of metaverse structure. And just importing assets and data and value into that structure has economic value. So it's a playground where people can create value in new ways and financialize it in new ways. So it's basically like a new substrate for creation, both like artistic and creative creation, but also economic innovation, financial innovation, technology innovation. Almost no sector in the US economy is growing. And a lot of the kind of low interest rate driven investments into technology stocks in the stock market, it shields that and it conceals it.
Wow, yeah.
But if you strip that away, blockchain, crypto, Web3, NFTs, whatever you want to call it, is one of the few growing industries in
That's
the post-industrial
fascinating.
world. And when you are working in an industry that's contracting and collapsing, you live in a world of diminishing returns where everyone's scrambling with each other over the pieces of the pie.
Yeah.
But if you're working with other human beings in a world where, in an industry where the pie is growing, I mean, even just as far as effect.
I feel that being in blockchain, like, there's so much opportunity. You can feel that expansiveness.
The pie
like, you
is
don't
growing.
feel as competitive or scarcity mindset about it. It's like, there's enough for you, there's enough for me, there's enough for us all. Because
well, you still want the biggest possible percentage of the growing
Sure.
pie, let's be real.
But it feels different than being in other industries.
Yes, it hits at every layer of the stack: emotional, economic, relationships. When you're in something that's growing versus when you're in something that's declining. Trust me, I came from the media industry in a moment where it was contracting, and the spirit of collaboration in the Web3 space is really something different and something everyone should get to experience. So, yeah, that's my hope. I guess I'll roll with an even more kind of macro and metaphorical hope, which is, I think that blockchain is a tool of freedom in the fight against authoritarianism. I think AI might be co-opted by authoritarian regimes to control people top down. And I think blockchain's economic system is going to be leveraged to enable people to be free bottoms up.
Do you, and I know this, you can ignore this question if you're like, I don't want to talk about this.
And that's why I think nothing's more American than apple pie and crypto.
Apple pie and the blockchain. We're here in Puerto Rico. I've been learning about a lot of the frustration folks have toward the government, towards the corruption, I think in general, but especially in the wake of Maria. A hope I've heard from people who are here working in blockchain is a more transparent government. And sort of what you're describing, which is how can we use blockchain for voting? How can we use blockchain in ways that create transparency among our political systems that can help to root out corruption and create more transparent government? What do you think of that? Do you feel that here at all?
Well, I think that I'm very glad that the media in the US focused as much as it did on Hurricane Maria, because I think that brought attention and it brought aid. But I think that the fact that that continues to be the main story people on the mainland think about with regard to Puerto Rico, it just doesn't make any sense in terms of the life I actually live. So the metropolis I live in the Greater San Juan area in Puerto Rico, is a flourishing city with great schools, with great museums, amazing restaurants. The food culture here is incredible. Some of my favorite restaurants here would outcompete the restaurants in Brooklyn where I
prices
came
too,
from.
I've learned.
They're
actually pretty expensive here.
Yeah, and just beautiful music. Think about the impact that like reggaeton has had on global music. Just from this small island, think about that outsized impact. And so thinking about Puerto Rico as Hurricane Maria, it just isn't accurate for the life that most people live. And that being said, in a lot of the mountainous areas in the center of this island, there are still people living without power or living without water pressure because of Hurricane Maria. And that has to be attended to the same way that there should be attention in the US on the plight of some people in Appalachia. Yeah. But that can't be the whole story. And so when I think about crypto here, I don't think about it as being used. I don't think the first use case is being used in the government or the governance here. I think the first use case is there's incredible engineering talent. There's incredible engineering talent here. There's a great university, Mayagüez, which is training talented engineers. There are 4 incredible accelerator programs here that were inspired by Startup Chile, which is an incredibly successful startup program by a country. And so those are what I'm really excited about, creating economic opportunity for people that live here. And what the Puerto Rican government has done with Act 2022-60 is use its sovereign powers, because Puerto Rico has some sovereign powers, to create economic incentives to power that growth. And so far, as I can tell, that's been working. Economic growth and development is what I would wish for blockchain and crypto in Puerto Rico to help accomplish.
And I totally hear all of that, and I say agree to the extent that I have like the right to agree with an opinion and your experience here. I will say I didn't come into Puerto Rico thinking about Hurricane Maria, and I think it was more something that I realized had such. I was talking to folks the other day and kind of compared it to 9/11. Like, it had such an impact, I think, on the psyche of the people.
100%.
And so it kind of shapes. It's like, again, like 9/11. Almost everything that comes after is in some way shaped by that sort of trauma. And I had somebody say, I got into blockchain after Hurricane Maria because there was, I think that it was a spark where they saw the cavalierness with which some of their elected officials were treating the lives that were lost in Maria. There was squandering of relief funds. Like, there was a disillusionment that seemed to follow that I'm thinking of Pedro Cruz, who I think you may know, who felt like he was driven harder into the arms of blockchain. Yeah,
in the blockchain
seems incredibly talented, and he really went harder on blockchain after that because he was so disillusioned about what was going on. So it's not an either or.
I think that's a blockchain and crypto story. That's a classic, and Pedro's a great example of this. I won't speak for him, but it's a classic story I hear about blockchain and crypto, where you see these very old government systems, and I'm speaking of the mainland US here, not working or squandering resources. And you think, would I rather trust big centralized systems that I have very little control over, or would I rather take power into my own hands, be able to safeguard my own value, be able to make my own money, be able to not depend on these big centralized systems? And I think when people have an experience of a breakdown of those big centralized systems to serve their interests, their light often goes on that they need to invest in their families, their communities' resilience. Yeah. And I think that blockchain and crypto are a great example of ways that communities can achieve resilience. And I think that's happening here. In terms of Maria, I moved here after Maria, so I can't speak to that experience, but we talk about the generation in the US that lived through World War II, that lived through the Great Depression as the greatest generation. That's what they're called. And so there's a real belief that going through hardship can make people into diamonds. Pressure makes diamonds. And that all of those experiences solidify a community's resolve to create, to move on, to do something better. And I think what I've seen among the super talented people here that I've met is that same kind of diamond hard resilience and excitement to build something new.
That's awesome. Okay, serotonin. So this, if I'm correct, was sort of your immediate post-ConsenSys.
Yeah, so I stepped down from my role as Chief Marketing Officer at ConsenSys in summer of 2019 to start building serotonin. I wanted to hang out my own shingle, which I did with my co-founder, Matthew Isles, who has an amazing marketing background and background in Web3. And I'd built a lot of the best practices for marketing in the Web3 space, namely designing systems to be self-marketing, incentive systems to be self-marketing, figuring out how to, instead of using inauthentic influencer marketing, how to leverage the influential people that you're already connected to in ways that are efficient to help get the word out. A lot of the visual design conventions in the space, which are evolving, I promise. No more interconnecting triangles as of 2018. We'll probably be doing this vaporwave thing for another minute, but it will be something else after, promise. Then a lot of the conventions around how we manage communities in the space, specifically how we invite our community members to be part of managing those communities with us. A lot of the kind of comms and messaging conventions. How do you do comms and messaging when you're not running a centralized company where everyone's going to say the same thing, where you aren't in control of everyone, and instead you see your stakeholders as the public immediately, even though you're not a public company, because that's what you think you owe to the community. So I built a lot of, and my teammates at ConsenSys on that Catalyst team built a lot of those best practices in the space. And what I wanted to do, along with my co-founder, is to apply those best practices to the next generation of products being built on these decentralized Web3 rails like Ethereum. And so we really saw ourselves as specializing in DAOs, in DeFi, in NFTs, in Web3 utilities, in L1 blockchains and L2 scaling, application layer, blockchain, sidechains, et cetera. We've probably done more token generations than anyone else. We help popularize the retroactive distribution trend for rewarding community and avoiding primary issuer risk. So it's a really interesting, great strategy. We became the largest pretty quickly Web3 marketing firm. And so we create brands, visual, verbal identities for brands. We bring them to market. We help them grow and achieve their goals on growth marketing, on content, social media, influencers, product marketing, events, all across the board.
And I'll brag for you and then, or encourage you to brag. Like, you guys took no money, right? You had no VC. You built up and were profitable.
I almost hesitate to make this joke, but we often say that we're venture funded. We just didn't give the VCs any equity.
Okay, there you go.
Because we have great partnerships with VCs that are investing in startups that they know would benefit from our services, and so we'll work with those startups. But no, we just started working like a family-owned laundromat. We just started
doing the work.
And then we grew. I'm going to actually lay this all out because it's so rare, and I think it'd be fun to see more people do it. But
that's why I want to highlight it too. Yeah.
We were getting paid money, and then we used that to hire more people, and we didn't hire them before.
Had the money.
Before we had the money, we'd hire them once we had it.
It's revelatory.
Really. I know this is really groundbreaking, but I guess I just want to say that it literally is possible to do that. And then one might say, well, professional services is a very linearly scaling revenue model, which is absolutely fair. And it's not really a venture investable revenue model, right? I would say to anyone starting a professional services business, if you can do so without investors that expect a 10x software style return, you should do that because it's not a traditionally venture investable model. But what we've done is we've used our position in the market. We have some of the best data in the market because we're the largest Web3 marketing firm. We have this amazing large customer base. We know exactly what products they would want and they would use if only someone built it. And so we built our own in-house product and engineering studio to start building those things. And we have an unfair advantage getting them to market, not only because we're great at go-to-market, but because we can sell them. We can sell them, and we can not even build it until we know that company X, Y, and Z would all be customers. And so that's how we built Mojito. Mojito is the leading NFT marketplace infrastructure platform. It serves a number of NFT e-commerce marketplaces, most notably the Sothebys metaverse, which within 3 months of going live surpassed 100 million in volume. And what that enables organizations and brands to do is continue to sell e-commerce, to do retail on their own owned website. Be able to completely control the experience, but to be able to sell digital goods in Web3.
It's amazing. So Sothebys was sort of your standout partner. Talk about like what were they looking for? What was the opportunity there, and like how does it apply to other brands that are trying to get into the space?
Yeah. So we call this the Web 2.5, and I think we're going to have an article about this soon about what the Web 2.5 is. But a lot of the big brands that come to us don't identify as Web3 transition. They're not trying to necessarily immediately transition their entire business model to being Web3. They're just forward-thinking, smart companies and executives that think, we want to test these waters. We want to see what this could mean for our business. We want to do it in a thoughtful way that's actually beneficial to Web3. And so Sothebys was one of those partners for us at Serotonin, and they had already planned some NFT drops when we partnered with them. We noticed the frustrations they had with those experiences, namely that they wanted to control the CRM, they wanted the customer data. It was completely bizarre to have to do it through a third-party platform, and they wouldn't have control of that experience when their whole business is curation and control of experience. And so we realized there was this white space in the market, and that we could really go in and build into that white space. And so the other interesting thing about Sotheby's is they're one of the most regulated companies on the planet, because art has always been, there's always been money laundering in the art world.
And it's a place to hide money is in fine art.
Always has been, and so justifiably, Sotheby's is one of the most, and all auction houses are some of the most regulated entities on planet Earth. And so, and they're very good at regulation and compliance as a result. And so we were able to get our platform up to their standards. We have tax assessment built in, we have KYC built in natively. We were able to get up to their standards, and then it's really easy to talk to other, even large-scale enterprises, because they're the most regulated, and so we're
like you're a bank, you're nothing. Like you're easy.
Exactly. Because we were able to get that first kind of domino customer.
Awesome. Is there a sector that you're most excited about as you look ahead of like Sothebys is sort of a natural entrant because they're already in art, and art has sort of been the most recent like early manifestation of NFTs. Is there a sector that you're like, the promise here is so great, we're so excited about it?
Yeah, actually, like we've signed some sports teams recently that are really
cool.
interesting, and I'm interested in that. But I'm going to go with something like less predictable and more kind of something that people aren't talking about as much, which is redeemables. So we're looking to, we're finalizing a partnership with one of the largest liquor brands.
Okay.
And so what on earth do you do with that?
Yeah.
So
you drink it in IRL.
you drink it. No, no, I'm just kidding. So let's say the most expensive bottles that these brands are selling are aged for many years, and they're collector's items, and they pass from one owner to another. Or like another example out of liquor is high, like super high-end collectible retail, like Air Jordans, right? Mm-hmm. And so most people that buy Air Jordans, or most people that buy, one of the oldest bottles of wine or one of the highest end bottles of whiskey, they aren't going to consume it immediately, and they might be buying it to resell it. And so there's a lot of risk to these brands to transport, and to the buyers every time they're transporting these bottles, every time, and then after they've sold as their first buyer, they don't get any more cuts when they're resold and resold and resold down the line. And then each time it's resold is more risk because you're transporting it, you need to store it, it needs to be at the right temperature. So if you can basically create an on-chain representation, an NFT of that object, of that Air Jordan shoe, of that bottle of whiskey, bottle of wine, then you can continue to have it be sold and resold and gain royalties from secondary sales in the process. And then finally, when someone does wish to consume it, they can redeem, and that hence redeemable. They can go ahead and redeem it. And so you cut down on risks, loss, damage, and you also create a financial asset. And maybe someone can borrow or loan.
Collateralize.
You can collateralize things with it. And so basically by bringing physical reality and modeling it on chain, which we can do with fungible tokens for fungible kinds of things and non-fungible tokens for non-fungible kinds of things, by creating an economic model of reality on the blockchain, you're unlocking this whole new category of financialization and different economic activities that can be done once you have all these assets modeled.
I'm getting the sign that we need to start wrapping, but this is, I want like another hour with you at some point to like continue the like many rabbit holes we could go down. You moved to Puerto Rico 2 years ago?
I moved here at the end of 2018.
4 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
End of 2018.
Okay.
Lived here for a full year starting 2019.
Okay. And why did you decide to move here? Was Act 60 a factor in that?
Oh yeah, 3 things. Weather.
Can't beat it.
It's beautiful. It's
all the time. I was like, is it winter here right now? Which is a stupid question, but I'm like, I know
it's such
sometimes
a great time here.
It's winter and it's amazing.
It's beautiful here. El Yunque. I don't know. Did you get to El Yunque?
We were
hiking in a tropical
only tropical rainforest in the U.S.
Totally gorgeous. The beaches, gorgeous. The climate. The restaurants, the museums, schools. I'm probably gonna have my kids here. So a great place, I thought, for me and my husband and our family to live our life. Another one was the crypto community here is incredible. I think that if you're interested in blockchain and crypto, living here is better than living in New York or LA or Miami even, or Austin. And that's because the people that move here are adventurers that are willing to experiment with being somewhere new. And folks across the island, whether they were born on the island, left the island, came back, whether they came from the mainland, these are all people that are pioneers and that are excited about and championing something new. And I think that energy you see here is in a more extreme version here than it is anywhere else on the mainland. So that's amazing. Even though it's a smaller crypto community than in some of those other cities, I think it's more dynamic and you can really feel it. And then the third factor is tax incentives. And it's incredible that Puerto Rico has leveraged that sovereignty over taxes in order to compete with New York, compete with Miami, compete with Austin for the same pool of talent that they want to introduce into their tax base. And they're able to compete and be successful because of that. And that's incredible. That's been part of what's attracted this great group of people. That's been part of what's inspired a lot of interesting, activity here. And so I think jurisdictions all over the world are going to compete for people, and we saw this in the pandemic a lot. People vote with their feet. People go places for mixtures of reasons, right? Weather is a factor, culture is a factor, schools are a factor, taxes are a factor. All these things are factors, and I think that Puerto Rico, between the factors it's been able to accumulate here, has a really strong argument, not just to attract great new folks from the mainland, but also to welcome back, as businesses grow here, a lot of the folks that were from here that left and that would be interested in moving here if only the jobs and opportunities were here that were attractive enough to make them want to come back. And that's what I'm really hoping, that this trend of young people, especially leaving Puerto Rico to pursue their careers, that trend reverses and that people that wish to continue living here on the island find thriving businesses and great opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you so much for meeting me here, showing me this place in the first place. And again, we'll do some sort of round 2 or round 3 because there's so much I would love to dive into with you. You're obviously so knowledgeable, but also just like your historical understanding of this space, having been in it so early on, is amazing.
Thank
you.
So
congratulations on everything you're
Thanks
doing. I love it. I've met so many, I've met multiple people from Serotonin, I've joked about this with others. I don't know if I said it to you. It's just all like gorgeous women. It's just all like super smart, like, amazing women that I've met from Serotonin. You're welcome. It's true.
Compliment.
I've met like 5 people from Serotonin and it's all women and they're all badass. So this is a pleasure.